how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another podcast of Speaking the Bare Truth. First of all, I want to say thank you once again for tuning into another episode, and I hope you're enjoying the series thus far. So once again, I'm sitting right next to my partner in crime, Nik. How are we doing?
Doing well, thank you, Jayden.
That's good. And also, we have another guest on our channel. You've probably seen her from the Creative Process, Hysteric Fairy, also known as Jenny. How are we doing today?
Hey, good guys.
That's a good. Thank you so much for once again joining us on the channel.
No, thank you for asking.
Oh, it's okay. It's my pleasure. Well, it's both of our pleasure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we're really excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And because like when we were talking on the Creative Process, you kind of dived in a bit into your glasswork, and so when I was thinking of episodes for this, I mentioned to Nik saying that this idea came to me where we would talk about like glasswork, because for me it's like that's such a pivotal point in so many art eras. There's just a lot of amazing glasswork, from like cathedrals to just even the way that they would design like glasses and all that sort of thing in so much of centuries. So it would be such a cool topic to dive into and kind of just have a conversation about it.
Yeah, happy to share what I know.
Oh, well, I mean...
Jen, you know a lot. You know a lot on the subject. We've had these conversations in the past about glass, and I think we were sort of speaking earlier about the history of glass. Do you want to sort of start us off?
Yeah,
there?
please.
I think if like there's heaps of information that you can find both in books and obviously on the internet, which is always a good source. But some of the earliest evidence of glass in use by humans obviously dates back to mid 3000 BC. So you can see it from Mesopotamia and from Egypt, where glass was used in jewelry and functional vessels. However, the oldest known glass is obsidian, which is, most people have heard the term obsidian, which is black glass, which is volcanic glass. It actually existed long before, just as a natural occurring medium as such. So it's always been with us since time immemorial. It really. So, but as glass developed, I think the first known blowpipe was from, I think I discovered it was the 1st century BC.
Wow.
So our technology had advanced enough that we had created a blowpipe, which is what you use to create blown glass.
Oh yeah, the thing that they blow into it. So
that dates
really
back
cool.
to the 1st century BC.
Wow.
That's incredible.
So, and then of course, a lot of people would be familiar in how glass developed into mosaics as well as other functional objects. It developed into mosaics through Italy and Rome, and the known as smalti. People would.
Oh yes.
A lot of people have heard the term smalti, which was beautifully, really intense chips of coloured glass, which went in to make a lot of beautiful mosaics, which we still have around us today from Europe. Probably what a lot of people also would be aware of is, aside from cathedral glass, which is where your stained glass comes from, and the term stained glass, which refers to the staining of the glass. So you have your coloured sheet.
That makes sense.
Where you see the faces of the saints or whatever in ecclesiastic glass. You'll notice that what you've got is that it's actually stained. It's actually a silver stain that actually is painted and fused onto the glass. So it starts the same way as sheet glass, which would have been hand formed and cut and fitted into leaded borders, the same as what we refer to as lead light. But stained glass is the technique of staining the glass.
I did not actually know that's why it was called.
That's so interesting. That's like an epiphany moment.
Yeah.
So all of this is created by using
the
a stain, and then it's similar. It's fired on to make it permanent.
Yeah.
And you can see. So we're just sort of looking. Jen's just showing us some books with some beautiful pieces, and you can sort of see. There's like it's almost like the texture of the glass. You can see that in, as well as the color and the tone of the glass, which is really interesting, like the gradation of it. Fascinating.
So obviously through coming into this sort of utilisation, it obviously continues to develop as human history develops, and so it obviously takes on a whole new life, and it goes into so many different, permeates different parts of our existence. So in the late 19th, early 20th century, you had Art Nouveau, and you have
gorgeous.
all those beautiful enamels, where glass powders are applied to metal surfaces to create jewellery. So there's lots of different ways where glass has permeated our existence and has developed along with our other ability through the industrial age. Factory glass during the early 20th century is Tiffany glass, Costa Boda, all those well-known glass manufacturers were factory made, and then during the 1960s it further evolved into studio glass, which is what many people would know now, all the people that blow beautiful sculptures. And so where glass finally sort of came out of being a functional or a fabrication kind of item, and became an art item.
Yeah, like the purpose of it was to make a functioning window, or it was used to make vessels, but eventually
in the 60s, studio glass evolved out of all of this, and so what you ended up with is people who are making sculptures out of glass, who are
the whole
making
purpose of the
art
it's an
items.
art object.
It's an art object and a decorative object as opposed to a functional object.
But it's interesting when you
both
think,
still exist, of course.
like Egyptians were using it to make jewelry, which is a beautiful kind of decorative.
It's still a decorative thing,
but it's also it's a
was a very
ornamental,
normal functional thing.
but it's
as
also
well.
functional. Yes.
So within that, and knowing, and obviously there's lots more in there, and probably some of my favourite imagery is obviously Art Nouveau, as you know.
Beautiful.
And knowing your passion, Nik, about women artists, some of this glass, a well-known artist by the name of Charles Rennie Mackintosh.
I've seen his work in Scotland. It's
his
just
wife
amazing.
was an exceptional glass worker
really?
as well.
But you never hear about her, do you?
No.
Which is always so. What was her name?
Margaret
Macdonald.
Macdonald. Mackintosh.
So she didn't, and she kept her surname.
She designed,
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that's, obviously you're looking at the period of Art Nouveau, so late 19th, early 20th century. And so she was actually a designer and manufacturer of glass as well.
Wow.
So I
We'll
thought
have
that
to look
might
her
be
up. Thank you.
something.
Yes, I'd love
think
to
of.
look her up.
But yeah, so she, and I have a real passion for this glass, but because it's quite beautiful. But other areas that obviously were quite dear to my heart was Marc Chagall's use of glass. Everybody knows his paintings, but in his 70s he actually became a glass worker and was creating stained glass windows. In his 70s.
That's incredible.
So we have over our lives, and over human history, there's so much evidence of glass, and it has permeated into all different areas. And like I said, he was a Fauvist, he was post-impressionist, but he was also a magical glass worker as well.
So where did his glass end up? Sorry, Jayden.
That's okay.
Some of it was cathedrals, though, like he did some church work, but most of it was more like as an art piece. But you can actually investigate some of his stained glass. Again, there's a lot of it on the internet where you can see. And it very much was the same as his beautiful, naive kind of painting style, but he replicated that in glass. His same passion for colour and light and all that. And love. All of his work sort of was very much about love. So, yeah.
That's beautiful.
That's amazing.
So,
I was going to ask, because you mentioned about how the art practice started like thousands of years ago. Was it like a rarity in those days, like where like
very much so.
Yeah, kind of like in today's time where it's like diamonds, like there's not a lot of them, but now when you think of glass, it's like everywhere. Like obviously now
it's a lot like it was very much because it wasn't an easy thing to manufacture. Going back 3,500 BC, there wasn't. If we look at the way people work glass today, there's a lot of there's a lot of technique involved about holding temperatures and taking glass up slowly to its top temperature and bringing it down fast, and then annealing and all those kinds of processes which are designed to ensure that the glass remains stable as a structure.
Wow.
So if you think about it, there was no, in 3,500 BC, there was no way to,
you don't have like
program your kiln to make sure that your temperatures remain balanced. So yes, it was a very difficult process, and so as such there wasn't a lot of it. So the fact that we have evidence of it is like evidence of anything that we discover archaeologically now. It's, oh my gosh, this has got to be protected for time immemorial. We're very lucky that, obviously cathedrals and ecclesiastic glass is very, very there and it's in structures. So it's really important that, that we remember that this is part of our history. It's not just a place of worship, but this is part of our journey artistically in the glass world as well. So
it's fascinating.
It's just really interesting because, as you said, like when you don't have the technology, they didn't have the technology to get it that hot. It's like, what would
it was done in sand with heat, and so there wasn't
go
a
to
lot
the
of
nearest volcano, going fishing
that's
it out.
Absolutely.
And they were making small pieces when you think about it.
It was all quite small.
Like
they weren't
pieces.
drawing sheets. So obviously
beautiful.
through as it progressed, through the Middle Ages became the development of the techniques of making sheet glass, which is obviously it was developed in a furnace. It's all using silica, so sand is a key component. So soda lime is in a lot of the contemporary glasses. Soda lime is often known as soda lime glass. A lot of the contemporary glasses that are manufactured for art use now. So there's been a lot of different components or ingredients that have gone into making glass over the years, and a lot of it involves using metal oxides to make colours. Red glass was made with gold, so that's why nobody could ever afford it. So glass has evolved even in its ingredients over the years to refine it to what we know today. Window glass is referred to as float glass, and the reason it's referred to as float glass is because it's manufactured on a molten river of tin. So and that helps to give it the clarity. So you have all these different ways that glass was manufactured. If you look at places like Captain Cook's cottage or something like that, just to bring up an really old building, 1800s building. If you look at the glass and you see that it's slightly undulating, you have this wave through it.
Glass,
that's because it was referred to as drawn glass. So it was actually drawn up vertically.
Wow.
Oh.
Often in a tube, and then it would have been cut and allowed to heated to settle. So you get this waving because it's been drawn vertically.
That's incredible.
Not layered flat.
Yeah.
It's
so yeah, that's where a lot of this comes from, is the different manufacturing techniques.
It's so interesting because when you actually think about like something as basic, right now in today's time, something as basic as glass, there's just so many now. There's just so many ways of creating it, but then it's kind of like with art in general. There's just so many ways of creating art. So, with glass, why not there be so many ways of creating glass?
Well, there is too. And that's sort of something that has always fascinated me, is that there's, if I don't know whether if you're a purist, but generally if you think about glass in its different forms, you have three different categories. You have cold glass, warm glass, hot glass.
Oh, yes.
Cold glass being glass that's worked cold. So your red light, mosaic.
Oh, yep.
The glass is cold. You don't heat it to create the piece.
Okay, so how do they create the piece?
For a lead light, you're basically using small pieces of cut glass. So you would start out with, a big sheet. The beginning of the process would be you create a cartoon. Yeah. So the basic design of black lines of what you're wanting to create. It's obviously designed in a way that until modern times, where you can get saws that can cut any shape
Yeah.
you like. But if you go back to the origins of cutting glass, there's only so many. You can't cut a 90-degree angle in glass.
No.
It doesn't allow you to do that. You can cut circles. There's good machine, little things to do it. But even cutting by hand, you can do it, and then using sickle stones, so rough stones to take off rough edges and things like that. So essentially what you'd be doing is you would have your drawing or your cartoon of what you're going to make. The black lines are what you would refer to as your lead lines, so where you're going to cut and put lead to hold those pieces together. So you're cutting your pieces, you're laying them in. There's obviously a little bit more to it, but whole lot of different little tricks and tips of what is done to hold the glass in place. So you're cutting the glass, you're cutting the lead to go around it. The lead, if you looked at it on profile, is a H. So it has like a lip that fits the glass in, and then a top and an edge. So the glass fits in underneath this H. So, and you obviously cut all your pieces, put them all in, solder all your joins of your lead. It then gets cemented to stop the glass rattling.
Oh, I was wondering about that.
Gets cemented.
Yeah.
And then it gets polished. So a lot of people use old stove polish to make the lead nice and black because it's quite silver. Lead is, you'll often see in a lot of churches where the lead's really old, and that's because it's in a purer form. These days, lead is mixed with a number of different metals to make it stronger, stiffer, harder, and to last longer. But that's why you see a lot of people restoring old panels, because the lead flakes and it's actually quite, it's not good. You don't want to be breathing that stuff in.
No, you don't usually.
So that's
not the best thing to breathe in. Lead.
Not a good thing. Hence why we've taken it out of oil paints and all sorts of other things. So yeah, the lead's quite old, so it's in quite a purer form. It's very, very soft and malleable. But when you put it all together and you solder it all up, it's quite strong.
Wow.
There was, and without sort of bringing up something sort of horribly depressing, in 9/11, with the World Trade Center, there was information that came back, anecdotal stuff that came back. And a lot of it came about during a time going back many years ago when I was working in the glass industry, where there was going to be a change to Australian standards about being able to use 3mm glass. And they were going to try and, say that it was not safe to use. It's a very long story and we need another 2 hours. But part of the anecdotal discussion that came out of all of this review of our standards to use lead-like glass was that in 9/11, obviously the blast radius was massive.
Yes. Yeah.
Toughened glass, most glass windows were shattered and blown out around the area, as you would imagine, because you've got this massive force.
Impact,
An impact that just would have blown out, blew out all these windows for, miles.
You saw the debris afterwards, and
the
debris
afterwards.
The paper just flying
there
down.
was
that was
evidence
the thing I'll never
that
forget.
some of the only glass that survived that was the stained glass in chapels and cathedrals.
I saw one of them. I actually went there to New York and I saw that little chapel that was right next to it, and it had an old graveyard and an old tree. The tree protected the graveyard from the debris. The tree was strong enough to...
Yes.
And,
jeez,
and
that's
and
amazing.
the glass survived.
Some coloured
one of the
glass
few things that
survived.
survived in the...
And the reason they're saying that is because if you think about it, lead, lead's pretty... Superman can't even see. Superman can't see through lead.
Exactly. So that says a lot.
That says a lot.
Lead is one of the strongest materials ever manufactured. It's extremely strong. And so... and if you were to hold up a little piece of glass this big and try and put your fist through it, you couldn't, because the smaller it gets, the stronger it is. It's a weird thing. So by the time you put this small piece of glass that you can't actually punch through and put lead around it, it's not as... And there's also this little bit of bend that's in it. So because you see a lot of old stained glass where it's quite curved, and that's because it is quite soft and malleable, but... Generally, they believe that, small pieces of glass that you can't break easily, ringed by lead, was strong enough to withstand.
really interesting. I didn't actually think about that, because I think of like how many times, like when if you've accidentally broken like a big piece of glass and it just shatters like instantly, and it's so just
fragile.
Yeah.
If you look at large pieces of 3mm glass, like I've seen 3mm glass in massive, like 2.5 meter panels. That is not a strong piece of glass.
No.
That is easily broken, easily shattered. But once you take that piece down to this size,
to your hand,
and if you look at the average stained glass window, the pieces are this big.
They're tiny.
You're not going to break that easily.
So like a couple of centimetres or even 10 centimetre diameter.
You're not going to break that easily.
It's a strong
but
piece.
Wow.
The truth of it and the evidence of it I've never purely seen, but that is just something that came out of these discussions about, was it really safe to have stained glass windows?
Is it safe to have windows?
In general.
Is it safe to have windows?
But
because I was just thinking about that. I was going to talk to you about the history of windows. Like civilization would be a different. We wouldn't be the people that we are in society. Thinking about it, if we didn't have windows, because we wouldn't be able to drive around in cars with. With
the windows on,
and so lots of various manufacturing techniques
Exactly.
over history. It's like anything with the industrial age. That obviously changed things, where we could mass manufacture glass, which is what we see in all our windows, and that's a whole different technique, but still requires the same thing: the heating and cooling of glass in a stable and predictable way. And art glass is no different. Art glass requires you to particularly in using warm or hot glass. Warm glass is often referred to as kiln work, which is what I do. Hot glass is usually what you would refer to as blowing, because you're talking thousands of degrees in those furnaces to make it molten and keep it molten. Whereas in a kiln, from speaking from Australian perspective, it's Celsius. So you're looking about 800 degrees to get the glass hot enough to fuse together. So that's always going to do that.
It's the wind, everybody. It's someone saying enter.
And it's getting a little bit cloudy out there, so it's getting a bit wicked. So generally speaking, so that's your three different areas. Your mosaics, which is cutting and layering usually onto a flat surface, or onto, you can do it onto round surfaces, obviously. A lot of people do mosaics on objects as well as on flat surfaces, but mosaics is usually, cementing and gluing pieces of glass down to form an image or a design, and then grouting like you would your bathroom. Essentially, it's no different to the tiling of a bathroom, but just a lot classier.
And Jen, I wanted to ask you, because you're going to do a piece. You've been asked to do a piece. Are you able to talk about that, or?
Well, not so much a piece at the moment, but I've been contacted by one of my my son, who's now 21, by one of his primary school teachers, who I had a small relationship with when I was working in the glass industry, and she's asked me if I'd be interested in discussing being an artist in residence at the primary school she's at.
Wow.
That's
so
fantastic.
I'm presuming that it will be a mosaic project, because that's something that children can handle quite easily. Although over the years I've done, some kiln work with young children, it is often easier to work on something like a mosaic, because it doesn't require a huge amount of setup. It doesn't require using kilns and things like that. So it's a bit more immediate. I know I've done it with, my nieces and nephews when they were children and things like that. And we used to do it out under the apple tree as a school holiday project, come and we'll do a mosaic. I think my brother's still got them. The kids are all like 20 something now. But there's still stuff floating around. I still have things floating around in here that Jayden made when he was about 7. So,
sweet.
So glass is very workable by young people, so long as you put protections in place, because obviously, yes, it's glass. You don't need to have people cutting themselves. But preparation of the product is really important to make sure that it's safe for them. But we're yet to sort of work it all out yet, but it's something I'm quite excited about discussing with her. So
that's exciting.
That is really awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to, to still be in contact with people, 15, I don't know, how long has it been since he's been in? 10 years since he's been in primary school, and Yeah,
really
so
lovely.
hopefully something will come of that, and we're going to sit down and talk
pretty
about
sure
it.
it will.
If it does,
Absolutely.
you'll have to make sure to share links with us and
Please do.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, definitely. Love to. Yeah.
That's-
So it's nice to have that to think about.
Absolutely.
In the future.
And I was gonna say, because like with the blowing technique, what did you call it? The technique, is it just called blowing?
It's blowing.
Yeah.
Just
like
called blowing glass.
So I remember when I was living in Germany for a year, we actually went to somewhere in the Black Forest where they were blowing glass, which was pretty amazing. And it's so weird from seeing it when it starts, because it's like it starts with this like gooey that looks like toffee. It's like a gooey toffee
molten
stuff.
glass.
Yeah, and then when they just blow into it and then it just turns into this shape, it's just it's so amazing.
So
to
it's
see
basically
it, like,
having a really big, really industrial straw.
Yeah, pretty much.
So the end of it is called, I think the end of it is called, because I haven't done blowing, and that's one thing I would like to do, and there are studios around about that you can do classes, but basically there is a punty, and what you're doing is you're basically scooping it up on this punty on the end, and then blowing, and then bringing it out, and you're rolling, and there's a whole heap of different techniques where they're patting, rolling, adding bits of frit, which is crushed glass, to create colours. So
it runs down, like
that's
it makes a running
and then
effect.
as you blow it stretches that colour out. So
like making candy in the old
it is. If you look at candy making, it's not unlike that. In fact, you'll in a lot of glass work, there is such a thing called, I don't know if you've heard the term, but it's called millefiori, which is an Italian term, but it means millions of flowers. And millefiori is exactly those long strips of candy with images in it, only made in glass. And so essentially it would be little flowers, and you would see it in jewellery. You see that's a little circle with flowers in them. That's called millefiori, which is basically, again, it's like the candy making. It's a long rod of glass, and it's created with lots of layered colour within that. So it would be built up and then heated and stretched to make it this long piece of glass, and then chopped up like they do candy.
Yeah.
But then it's glass, and it goes into making glass.
It's mesmerising.
Commonly referred to as millefiori, which means millions of flowers.
I think that's beautiful. So, very descriptive as well.
So that's something, again, that comes out of that, how glasses evolved into lots of different little components that you can use to create your work. So if we think in terms of that, glass was just this molten thing, but also once it becomes molten, it can be changed in its form in so many different ways. And there's an interesting scientific battle, I believe, on whether glass is actually a solid or a liquid.
That's interesting concept.
Yeah, that's a...
And I once read somewhere, and I don't know how truthful it is because I'm so not a scientist, but there's some, school of thought that it is neither. It is basically molecules that are moving. Or,
it's kind of like a metamorphosis.
Because once you heat it up, exactly, it's the same as ice. Ice is just... It's just water that isn't...
It's in a different state.
Yeah. It's not hard. It's not...
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So not unlike that. So there's this, it's an interesting scientific question. Is it a solid or a liquid? Because once you heat it, it becomes
scientists
liquid.
Are listening. They might be able to
please let us know,
might be able to come back to us and confirm or deny my years of talking to people and all that information that gets scrambled in your brain. But essentially that's what the annealing process is all about when you're creating art glass, is that your annealing process is, after you've heated it up, you've basically sent these molecules, you've taken them to ridiculous degrees, and the molecules are all in a panic state. So basically once you're bringing it back down, and that was always the easiest way to explain it, is once you're bringing it back down, you hold it at a set temperature that is probably historically understood, so that the molecules are allowed to realign and stabilize before you come back to basic air temperature.
It's kind of like going against nature. It's like one of those things where it's... Because
Mm.
I didn't actually think about that. If you really logically think about, is it one or the other? But then it's kind of like...
It has the capacity to be both.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing. So essentially...
And glass exists in volcanic,
Yeah.
like in nature, like you said before.
As a volcanic glass. Yeah.
But it's something
which
that
is just molten
humans have
sand.
manipulated to create beautiful
and
objects.
using those ingredients, which is sand. There's always going to be crickets.
There's a little cricket come to say hello.
Yeah.
It actually sounds quite lovely.
Yeah, it's really nice, but I don't know if it's saying it as a compliment or that it's
like,
just
do you
feeling...
Yeah, it's actually disputing my hypothesis.
I was just thinking, do you agree or disagree?
It's like, are you trying to just do that, like... Do
you want to be part of the action over here?
Yeah, pretty much. But, I think that's just so interesting, because there's, like, so many... It just reminds me of, like, how there were so many things in our world
it's
where...
raining now.
It's now the rain's coming now. That there's just so many things in this world where it's kind of like, as you said, like there's water that can be turned into a solid, but is mainly liquid. But then it's like glass that is like when you start it, it's like this gooey. It literally looks like candy that is seen as liquid, but then it's hardens and turns into a solid. But it's like
once you apply heat again,
it melts again.
Goes back to being a liquid.
and anyone that's working with glass as an artist would have to understand that process in great detail.
It's really important to understand that it does require what is known as the annealing process, which is basically allowing that moment in time, and depending on how thick the glass determines how long you leave it or how long it needs to anneal for, because it needs to work all the way through that whatever that object is. So for instance, if I was to, there's lots of different techniques, but normally what I do is making platters or slim thin objects that are usually about 3 to 6 mil. So they need about an hour to anneal. But in the and that's all programmed. Thankfully, I don't have to worry about the sand and think about it. It's all programmed into the kiln. But if I do a casting, which I've done castings over the years, and there's a little pyramid sitting on the top there.
Oh, right.
Doing a casting. So that's obviously lots and lots and lots of glass, and it's in a little metal form.
That's really lovely.
So, but to do those, I need to run the kiln for approximately 2.5 days.
Wow.
So normally the full process to do a plate is 9.5 hours, but then it needs to cool down to room temperature, which takes a little bit of time. So in my kiln, it runs, basically I'll run it during the day, and by the next day I can open it. It will have been back to room temperature much sooner than that, but in doing castings, you could run your kiln for days to do a casting, because you need not an hour to anneal. You might need 5 hours to anneal glass. So the thicker the glass becomes, the larger the piece becomes, the larger, the depth of glass, the longer you need to anneal. And that is often done as a matter of trial and error in most glass manufacturing, but also over the years, if we talk about, studio glass being from about the 1960s, so we have, 50 years of history of studio glass techniques, where there would be different types of kilns, whether they're run by gas back then and not electricity like now. So there would be, information that has come through all that. So you buy
documented,
and it's documented, and the glass manufacturers have done, these days we're very, very lucky. The glass manufacturers have done huge amounts of testing to make sure that the glass is compatible, which is another important aspect. Working in kiln or blowing glass, anything where you're heating and joining different pieces, it requires a lot of testing.
Oh, absolutely.
So we're very fortunate in this time that a lot of that's been done for us. So I can get out a book or a color chart and a firing chart that comes with my kiln when I buy it, that says you want to do this, or if you want to do that, you use that. Each kiln's unique, or each process is unique. So what I get to in a temperature in my kiln may not be the same as you do in another kiln, because
that's interesting.
It's like anything, it's like when you cook on your stove. Your oven will cook differently
Exactly.
your
It all has its intricacies.
So kilns are the same. So you do a lot of testing. And this is where the importance of choosing the right glass and using just one type of glass together. There's a lot of discussion about what they call a coefficient of expansion. So it can be very technical.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which essentially means that when you heat up your glass, it expands and contracts. It's like anything, like the door that sticks when it's gets cold or hot, you know. And because wood and most other, organic things expand and contract with heat and cool. So glass is no different. It expands and then it contracts when it's cooling. So, so what you need to do is ensure that the testing process has a particular number that it's applied to each of the different brands of glass. So the glass that I use, for instance, is called 96 COE. So it's a 96 coefficient of expansion. So I think it's degrees. That's the coefficient of expansion. But other glasses are 104 COE or 90 COE. So if I put 104 with a 90 and I put those together, they're going to just really loathe each other and you're just going to get broken glass. Because they're expanding and contracting. It's like we were talking about oil and acrylic.
I was just going to ask you a question about process, because listening to you talk, Jen, just made me think about photography. There's a process, like for artists, there's a process, like being a sculptor, there's a process. If you're a bronze sculptor, there's a process. If you're a ceramic artist, there's a process. If you're an oil painter, there's a process. And you need to know, right. Mainly you need to know the medium, you need to know the process, but can you describe that kind of description of paint was really interesting.
Okay, so the process in utilising glass is like I was saying, it's understanding the coefficient of expansion of your glass product. So again, we're very privileged. We have a number of very, very good glass manufacturers around the world. A lot of the, what I would term as fusing glass manufacturers, but they also do a number of, blowing glasses as well. But I use a company which used to be called Spectrum, but is now owned by a company called Oceanside. And so they manufacture a range of fusing glasses in lots and lots and lots of glorious colours and textures. And so essentially, not only is it just straight colours, but it can be very, very extraordinarily unique and fun to use. So essentially what they're doing is they're creating a glass with a certain recipe that is designed to work together, and what they refer to as tested compatible. So they test it in their testing facilities, and they make sure that whatever they're doing, whatever they're producing, will as best as possible work for you in the kiln. It doesn't preclude you from doing your own testing to make sure what you're trying to make is going to work. So a lot of artists will grab lots of little chips of glass and they'll put them together in the kiln and they'll run the kiln just to make sure that it all works before they start making.
So kind of a test run.
A test run.
Because that must be the tragic thing, like when you open a kiln, if you're making a ceramic piece and it's fired and it's just a disaster.
Yeah. I've had that happen. Yeah. It's like I was commissioned to make a vase for someone, and
whoa.
And
that's amazing.
And it failed. Dreadfully.
That's a fail?
You see that? Yeah.
Okay.
So I actually refired it. So I thought, and then I'll just keep it. I refired it, which is not normally what you do. But basically I was, asked to make this vase for someone. And so the first step of a process like this to get something of, a vase shape, is you work it flat. So this is basically 2 layers of glass. You can actually see that it's got a clear layer and a coloured layer.
Yeah.
So basically would have created flat. So cut 2 pieces of glass, one clear, one coloured. These chips of what is called dichroic glass, which is a whole other fun story. They go sprinkled on the top. That's all taken out of sheet and cut down and crushed and whatnot.
That almost looks like a mosaic.
And then it's fused flat. Now, I can't remember whether with this one it actually cracked when I fused it flat, but I think it actually cracked when I did the drape. So this is what's referred to as a drape as opposed to a slump. These are some of the fun terms that
I love the terms
when working in glass.
Which people who are listening can look up.
These terms.
Okay, so what in this case, it's made as a flat panel. It's then stood over a milkshake container, essentially.
Everyday objects.
And almost, but I paid much more than I would have for a milkshake thing. But
fair enough.
But it's primed with a release agent so that the glass doesn't stick to it. So that has to be primed. Glass will adhere to basically anything, unless it's primed with a release agent. Now you can use different products to achieve that, and again, there's lots of other conversations we could be having, but essentially you need a release agent. You need something that stops the glass from sticking to other materials.
Yes.
In this case, to the stainless steel jar, essentially. So make the piece flat, then it sits on top here, flat, and you pop the kiln on and it drops around it. So it drapes over it. Hence the term drape. And then obviously when you turn it upside down, you're supposed to have a vase.
It almost looks like a flower.
This is where the glass decided it didn't like
it
something about the process. There would have been a slight flaw. It could have been in my anneal. You're never going to really know. It could have been it didn't anneal quite as long as it should have. It could have been that there was a slight flaw in the glass somewhere that wasn't visible to me. So there are things that just go wrong. It took me 3 goes to make this. So I actually lost money on the deal. But eventually the girl got an orange vase. And, but it's one of those things that's part of the whole process of that. You are leaving it up to the lap of the gods in a way. Once you shut the kiln and you think you've done everything right, and once you turn that kiln on and you walk away from it, it's out of your hands.
It's like, please
it'll
work.
be what it's going to be. So there's also needing to be sure of your product, and so as I said, there's lots of glass manufacturers out there. Needing to be sure of your product means that you have less of that happening. If I was to use a different product that is not the same coefficient of expansion, you could pretty much guarantee that's going to happen every single time. Because you have what's referred to as thermal shock. So it's also part of the cooling down process. It shocks and that breaks the glass. So by using the wrong products together, it shocks it and it can't cope. And it is about oil and water.
Just
can you describe that? Because I love that. What Jen was describing the other night, it's such a beautiful thing that people don't think about it.
It's one of those things if you're an oil painter or an acrylic painter, there is a way of going. You can do oils over acrylic because they have different drying periods. So oil paint, pretty much you'll hear a lot of people that don't actually varnish oil paintings for at least 6 months after finishing a painting, and that's because the paint's not dry for at least 6 months. You can touch it.
That long?
You can touch it. It
takes a long time.
Push on it, but the actual full drying process of all those molecules is approximately 6 months.
And this made me. Did this conversation start when I was talking about David? My partner David is a picture framer, and at his work, a collector purchased Mercamura's palette with the oil paint still wet in her
so
palette.
How long would it have been since she painted?
Exactly. So when they purchased it, it was after she had passed away and her family was working up to do what to do with her estate. And a collector purchased it, and other institutions purchased items, including my work at the museum, Museums Victoria and the Hiding Museum. So the Immigration Museum. Purchased items, and other like NGV, I'm pretty sure did. But a private collector purchased one of her palettes, and David said it was wet, and they literally had to put it in a drawer for a number of months. And keep checking on it to see if it had dried, and it took a long time. To be
completely dry, it takes months and months.
I didn't know that.
So within that process, what you've got is you've got the paint contracting as it dries. So if you put oil paint and then acrylic on the top, because acrylic paint, we all know acrylic paint is like you put it on your house and it's dry in an hour, you know. It contracts and dries much faster, and that was always the benefit of acrylic paint, is that it dries much faster and is completely dry a lot quicker than oil. So whilst you can prime your canvas with acrylic and paint oils on the top because it's contracted already.
Yes. Yeah.
So you can put your oils on the top. But if you put oils down and then paint acrylic on the top, your acrylic will eventually crack, because what's happening is what's under it is contracting. This can't move anymore. It's done all it's going to do. So this acrylic on the top will crack over time, because what's behind it is shrinking.
It's still...
And it's still moving. So if you've got something on the top, that is not. So glass COE would essentially be the same. As it's cooling, if you've got layers of different products that shrink at a different time or a different over a different space, then it's not going to work, because this bottom bit's already contracted as far as it's going to go. The top piece says, I'm still going, or I can't, you know, I can't move because the bottom won't let me. So, or the top won't let me. So you create this friction between the two of them, and hence you get glass that doesn't work.
That's so interesting, because, you know,
glass.
I think of, like, in a way, it's like the process of darkroom photography. It's like when you have your different chemicals that you put the photographs in. If you... Because each chemical, like, obviously one activates the Polaroid and then the other stops it from activating.
And if we had stop, before we had stop, when photography, the early history of photography, before they discovered the stop or the fixer, then so what would happen is the photograph would just go to blackness.
Yeah, exactly.
Just overexposed.
So
there's no way to stop that process.
So everything has a process, and everything we do has a process, and it goes through those steps.
I think people don't respect that artists... people out there that don't think of art as a profession, or you know, or understand the complexities of it.
They don't also understand the study and the research that goes alongside behind it. And whilst you don't think of yourself as someone that is, I don't often think of myself as someone that is highly educated, but I know I've read and snippets here and snippets there and talked to...
Yeah, I was like...
Anyone listening to Jen talk can understand.
Exactly, I think it's like...
You know, but, you know, for me, it's about, you know, these little snippets of information, and it's like anything. You get into conversation with people, and...
You learn from each other.
And it's about that exchange of information and just in conversation with people. And so for me, you know, my glass journey came out of working with a glass company. And and I would say that, you know, I was like, you know, probably not like a lot of people. But anyway, in my degree course, which is like in the early to mid 80s, like everybody else did, history of art, you know, looked at, like we were talking about earlier, looked at Chartres Cathedral and, you know, all these pictures in books and all this sort of thing. Yes, I know what glass is. That's stained glass. Know all about it. And then, you know, flash forward another however many years, not too many, we'll talk about decades later, to when I went, you know, I had my son, I needed to get a job. There was this little craft glass company wanting a sales rep, and I thought, oh, that looks like interesting, I'll just go apply for that. So get this job, thankfully, with this company that wholesales coloured glass, art glass, and they distribute it all around the country. One of the major importers in Australia, bringing in the best quality glasses for stained glass, lead light, mosaic, fused glass, all those sorts of areas. So, and here's little me walking in there saying, yes, I know glass, I did glass, you know, way back in the 80s, I learned about glass. And then I walk in the door of this massive warehouse in Box Hill, and there's this massive factory, and it's just row upon row upon row of sheets of glass.
Wow.
Ranging between just over 1 metre by 1 metre in size to up to 2.5 metres in size. And it's just thousands of them.
And different colours or different...
All different colours, all different textures. You know, we were looking at the glass on Thursday night at Life Drawing in the oratory.
In the
and we were
Abbotsford
talking
Convent.
about how it's got all those lovely little hammered textures and ripple textures and all that sort of thing.
Oh, wow.
But imagine that in rows and rows and rows and rows of sheets in red and yellow and orange and amber and green and blue and purple, and it's just miles of it. And I go,
wow.
That's
I have some more to learn, I think.
Oh, that's glass.
This is the beginning of my journey
That's
with
it.
glass.
That's it. And that's where you find out that you sometimes think you know a lot, but you don't until you get immersed into this world. And so my job was as a sales rep. So I was going out visiting all these studios, and I was seeing people that were making lead light,
So you're getting to meet
lead
amazing
lights to
artists.
go in kitchen cabinets and lead light to go in cathedrals. And so very much a privilege to start off with, to meet with people that have done some of the most extraordinary glass that this country's ever seen. Do
you want to describe one of your favourite artists?
So, to tell you two of my favourites,
yes.
One was an artist by the name of David Wright, who I had the pleasure of meeting many times and visiting his studio, which was down in Flinders back then. I'm assuming it's still down there. There is a book out with the work that he created for Temple Beth Israel, which I think is down in Elstonwick somewhere, and well worth a visit to go and see, because I couldn't even begin to describe them, but well worth Googling him, David Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. His work is exquisite. He uses a lot of kiln forming of components that go into his lead light work and stained glass work. So they are extremely intricate, where he creates textures like palm fronds by applying like a mixing, I think he was using whiting and water to pipe in shapes on the bottom of his kiln, and then he puts the glass over the top and it slumps into it and it looks like palm frond.
Wow.
Just blow your mind kind of stuff. So,
and
pretty awesome.
You've described him to me before that he was really willing to share his processes.
He very much did share his
I think
process.
That's great that artists can do that.
I respect artists that
I
do
was
that.
involved with a glass group for a little while, for many years, and we actually had him come talk to us, and he explained a little story to us about one of his adventures, and it's probably something that, as I said, would be dear to your heart, as very strong and sense of about women in art and about women's issues in general. David was working on and I think it was during the installation of this particular window. I'm not 100% sure if these two stories coincide, but there is a window in a cathedral in South Australia which is called the Ministry of Women, and it is a window
I'll have to go visit this place, I think.
it was a window that was designed to celebrate the women in Christianity and in the scriptures.
Oh, that's
beautiful.
So it's also
really
referred to as the Magdalene window. So it would be very much worth you investigating this window, because it is exquisite.
South
but anyway,
Australia, visit it. Any listeners from South Australia?
Please go and check
please
that out.
visit.
And
Anyway,
report
so
back.
I recall David coming to visit us at the glass place that I was working at to show us, original sketches and things like that of all this work, and it's just like, oh my God. But anyway, David was telling us that when they were doing some installations in this cathedral over in South Australia, it was him, and obviously they can't do it alone. You need a team of people to get these things up. You need scaffolding and all this sort of thing. It's physically a very demanding thing to install these windows.
And also probably from a safety point of view.
And from a safety point of view, absolutely. So they're up on this scaffolding very, very early one morning. Very early one morning, they're up in the scaffolding. They're right up the top of this cathedral, right up high, and they're working away, but they're not making much noise. So the Archbishop, who didn't realise they were there, came in, and he comes to the altar, and he's apparently doing his morning, his morning prayers and all this sort of thing, and doing his, whatever they do.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah this, hallelujah that. But still didn't realise they were up there. And anyway, so while this Archbishop is going, doing all these prayers, and then he's crossing himself and saying amen, but one of David's helpers said in a very loud voice, "Bless you, my son," scared the crap out of him. Because he's thinking God's talking to him.
God has never done this to me. God
So, And
Imagine that.
I just think there's nothing funny. Just all of a sudden, this booming voice comes out of the top of the cathedral saying, "Bless you, my son." And I think the Archbishop probably had to pick himself up off the floor.
Yeah. I just love that
brilliant.
sense of humour. Just like you're just working and then just like. I'm gonna have fun with this. I'm just gonna have fun with this.
How did you think just at that time?
If that was my dad, if he had a white hanky, he would have dropped it and been like, "Ooh, there's this little ghost spirit."
Oh gosh.
So there's so many things you could have done, but bless you, my son. So. And so he was just such a remarkable man to listen to about his work and his life. And I believe there's, and when I was doing a little bit of research for this and looking into him again, because obviously I hadn't thought of him for such a long time, I do believe there's a book that's been published about his life and times up till now. So that would be quite interesting.
And he received an Order of Australia.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen him. I'd have to look into that. But I know there are.
Yeah, Google it.
Just
Google it.
That have received. Dr.
Professor
Bronwyn
Google
Hughes,
my
who
deck
knows, I think you know Bronwyn Hughes.
Yes, I do know Bronwyn Hughes. She's amazing.
Knows so much about Australian stained glass. She also runs tours through Australia, Melbourne, around Melbourne, going to Melbourne. And this shows how
small world this community is.
Before
Jen and I met, I worked at the Duldig Studio as a volunteer, cataloguing their photographic collection of Carl Duldig, and that's how I met Donna and Bronwyn. And the funny thing is, years later, I met Jen through Life Drawing.
I met them both about 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and then it's strange that, it's so weird how worlds can come together.
6 degrees of separation.
So true, yes.
But,
that's one fun story.
I think the one thing that really stands out for me is just hearing that, like, he was more than happy to, like, if someone said, like, how do you do this? Because to be honest, I find that for me in... Like, I've even heard in photography, talking to other models and other thing like that, I say, so how did you do this? And they're like, I don't know. Because the photographer won't share, and it's just like...
And look, that is
strange.
That is in the art industry.
People can become very territorial and protective.
It's territorial.
No, it's
they're
mine.
protective of their style and their techniques. And it's,
I understand it to a degree for designers. Like, for example, for designers where people are like, okay, just tell us how you did it, so then we don't have to pay you anymore. This is for a graphic designer I'm talking about.
I can see
so
that.
almost exploit the designer, but in a visual art, in a creative arts, in a decorative arts, to share is...
I don't
because
think
it comes
an
both
issue.
ways.
And I've met a lot of people over the years because thankfully, and blessed as I am in my working career as well as my artistic career, I've worked in a number of places where I've been... I've been able to be immersed in the creative industry, from working through art shops and then with the
meeting
glass,
Mercamora,
Mercamora, things like that. It's like,
was with you.
I've been really blessed by that. But what I often find the most interesting thing is, and this was always with our little glass group that I was involved with for about 10 or 12 years. What we discover is that whilst we all know the same mechanics of doing, which means how to put a piece of charcoal on the paper, or how to cut a piece of glass and layer it, it doesn't matter what that form is or what that form of art takes. Your personality is what comes out on it.
That's true.
That's like...
I'm sorry,
true.
Your personality is not my personality.
No.
Your personality is not my personality. We're all very unique. We know the same things, but how it eventuates is going to be completely different. Because it's going to be about, my personality is what you see in what I make and do.
No one else can emulate that.
No one can take away that personality.
Nobody can do a life drawing like I do. No one can do a life drawing like you do. No one can do a life drawing like you do. Photography's the same. It's your eye. It's what's coming out of your
expression,
spiritual, emotional,
soul,
imagination, creative,
everything that makes you a human being.
Everything that makes you is what comes out in what you make.
Yeah.
I don't understand that sort of selfish, like, holding back and sort of going, I don't want to share. Because honestly, we should be giving, like, and giving. Yeah. So, for example, in the Top Secret Life Drawing, Jean-Luc's amazing community. Yeah. What is so special about it is everyone sharing their styles
Nobody's
and
protective
techniques
of anything.
And they're like, have you tried, this? Like, have you, this is how I do what, you can walk up to a fellow artist and they'll say, you just ask them, they'll say, this is how how I
And
do
let's
it.
be perfectly honest, none of this exists if we don't learn from each other.
Exactly.
Yes.
This stops now.
Yeah.
If I don't teach people how to do this,
Yes.
it's done with my generation.
Well,
it doesn't go
exactly.
any further.
It's an art
If
form
we
that needs to
haven't-
be shared
If
and
we
apprentices and
haven't,
mentored.
then we wouldn't have learned how to shear a sheep. We
That's
wouldn't have
right.
learned of how to make food. We wouldn't have
we
learned
wouldn't have had to use
all
glass
the
from ancient
things.
years.
Exactly,
You know, that's been
yeah.
passed down.
everything in human existence has been passed down.
Yeah.
How do you make a house? How do you
Yeah.
how do you build a cabinet? How do you know build an easel, make a chair?
I love the Japanese have a very amazing. They take this very seriously in a lot of their forms, like their traditional forms of
Yes.
art. So they have a very strong master, not a master apprentice. I'm not sure, if
But
that's
that's what it is.
So that
Yes,
it doesn't
you
die
have-
out with the master.
That's
who,
exactly
who has
right.
learnt
It needs to
years
be
and years of
passed on.
experience.
Yeah.
They're
You
passing
need
that
to
on.
kind of get over yourself.
That's right.
You know,
It's
check
Yeah.
your ego at the door and start realizing that if you
You
don't,
can't take it with you when you go. So you need to pass that on.
immortality comes from sharing what you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
yeah, because it's a legacy that you leave.
It is a
behind.
legacy you leave behind.
yeah, because I mean, to be honest, and like,
Not
if
bad
any
laugh,
of the if any of the people who work in my photography line are listening, first of all, no disrespect, I love you guys, but you know, sometimes I love that step back from life drawing because for me, when I go to life drawing, as Nick said, there was people, and as you said as well, Jen, like everyone's just, you know, willing to share and all that sort of thing. But yeah, in photography, everyone, no disrespect, are very precious. Like for me, like I recently had coffee with a newbie photographer because he just messaged me saying, hey, you know, I love your work. Can you come have coffee with me so I can pretty much pick at your mind? And I'm like, yeah,
Exactly.
sure. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, because I was not afraid to share anything, you
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
I'm like, this is what I do, you know, this is how
Yeah.
and as you said, like, if we don't share it, then it just stops.
It
just stops right
now.
there.
It stops now.
It's a
Yeah.
giving.
It
It's
doesn't
a,
go
it's,
anywhere
it's a
else.
reciprocal thing. So if I teach someone, they'll teach me something. It's
Exactly.
we
And-
learn
and
from each other.
Exactly. And this is
It's
what we've talked about as well,
yeah.
because I talk about my exposure through my history in art was more or less, you know, all encompassed in, you know, the Impressionism movement, because that was what resonated with me personally. But then you're posting on Facebook and Instagram all those wonderful posts about contemporary women artists, and I'm
a
going,
chain reaction.
oh my
Yeah.
God, I never
Yeah.
I've had so
heard of
amazing.
that person. This is wild, you
I
know.
had,
So
you know, like
it's opening people to the possibilities.
Yeah.
it's amazing the comments I've received because around International Women's Day I like to post about female
Yes.
artists to kind of raise
Yeah.
awareness.
Yeah.
And I have had so many comments from people saying, I didn't realize that person was Australian. I didn't realize I
Yes.
didn't even know about this artist. I'm looking them up from people
Yeah.
that know a lot about art history, and it means something to me because it's like, again, it's that sharing of knowledge.
Yeah.
It's
And
about-
that's where it all comes
community.
from. And a lot of what I picked up to use in my glass practice, as much as in my other art practices, but a lot of what I learnt in my glass practice came from talking to other glass artists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
I didn't do any formal training on glass. I
Yeah.
was fortunate enough to work in the industry and talk to people and be able to
Yeah.
access the
That's
material.
that's your education
So-
by being
So
exposed
they
to
taught
artists.
me
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
this. I didn't
Honestly, you
know,
learn more than you would ever learn at university by
Yeah.
talking to
absolutely.
experienced
And
artists.
you know, so
my
I've been
experience.
privileged enough to meet some of the most extraordinary artists, and we have so many of them here. The people, I think we were discussing the cathedral, the entrance to the cathedral
Yes.
of St Paul's Cathedral in the city, which is opposite
Oh,
Flinders Street.
Yes.
Yes.
That
It's
entryway
incredible.
was done by Janusz and Magda Kuzbicki, who had
Oh,
had a glass
yes.
practice for a very, very, very long time. They won the commission to do this particular installation.
Yeah.
They flew to France to choose their glass
Oh gosh.
and then bring it back.
Lovely.
You know, so
Can I, someone commission me?
I just, you know,
yeah,
to
yeah.
go
Because I was gonna say.
well,
But the joy of it is that
I
they
want a
went.
free ticket,
They
thank you.
went to the glass manufacturer. You can hear the rain coming
it's
down.
going crazy.
Yeah. Sorry for everyone who's trying to hear us.
Hopefully you
I'm
can
sorry.
hear us.
Yes, that'd be
there's,
good.
there's the beauty of rain on a tin shed. Thank goodness
actually
it's
love
colour
it.
bond.
I actually love your studio because you've got natural light coming in.
Yeah.
But you've also got the sounds of winds and
Nature.
rain, and that must be.
It's I love it in here. I will often, even when it's raining, it's gone crazy.
We might have to yell at you.
Nature fights back.
It does.
But you were telling us about this couple that are both artists, and they work together as they collaborate on pieces together.
Yeah. So the cathedral, the St Paul's Cathedral, was done with glass, which was manufactured by a company called Saint Just.
Yes.
They're in France. They're still making glass in traditional methods, and so.
Oh, jeez.
I was watching it come over. I can see the clouds. I'm going, we're going to get some rain here.
It's because we've been talking for like an hour already.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just going all the way through.
Sorry. Weird. It's like she's up again and talking way too much. We're going to put
Time's up.
It's like my partner, when I talk too much, he just puts his hand on my shoulder. I'm like, oh, am I talking too much? And he's like,
yeah.
And he just nods sweetly. And it's just his sweet way of telling me, yes, Nik, you're talking too much.
Yeah.
I love it.
It really is. It's really coming down.
It's bucketing.
Yeah.
It's bucketing
Get a
down.
bucket
Anyway,
to fill it up.
it's a beautiful cathedral. They flew to Saint-Just in France to get what is known as glace dalle, which is bricks of glass.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And the technique of creating with them is that you cut them and chip them to create pieces. You lay them in a bed of sand, and then you pour concrete or epoxy resin or something like that to fill in around, so you don't use a traditional lead because it's too thick. It's like the dalle is about 2 inches thick in big bricks, so it's not possible to lead them. So you lay them in a bed of sand to put the pieces in place, and then you would pour epoxy resin in the cracks to hold it all together.
Fascinating.
So
I'll have to go and visit. We might have to do a bit of an excursion.
It's a beautiful.
We'll have to get our other glass
beautiful
friends to join us.
So
Bronwyn and Donna.
Yes.
I hope you're listening, Bronwyn and Donna.
But there's a lot of really amazing contemporary Australian artists, and 3 of them particularly that I adore their work. And I wrote them down because I didn't want to make sure I forgot one of them because I'd be in real trouble. But Brenda Page, Kristen McFarlane, and Laurie Young. Laurie Young works often with her partner, Christian Arnold, and they do furnace work, which is basic sculpture using the same as blowing, but making sculptures, 3D sculptures.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
Laurie, I met all 3 of them when I was in the glass industry, but Laurie and Kristen particularly I met when Monash University used to have a glass department where they used to teach studio glass. And Laurie used to work in what's known as pâte de verre, which is creating a paste of glass, essentially. Pâte meaning paste, verre meaning glass. So it's a paste of glass. So it's using crushed glass, powdered glass, and then mixing it with a binder and then painting it into a mould. And her work is exquisite and highly detailed. Wow. But she works also in conjunction with her partner Christian, who is probably one of the best flame or torch workers, which is using like a torch head to create.
Oh, wow.
You used to see them in shopping centres with borosilicate, which is another soft glass, where they make horses. And you've seen it come out of Murano glass, all these beautiful glasses. That's done with big torch heads.
I love it.
Massive big torches, so it's flirting with danger. It's wonderful.
You don't see that so much now, but in the 80s, when I was a kid, we used to see that. Are they afraid to do it these days? They don't want people with them.
I mean, it's like you just go in and say, all right, I'm going to just make this glass. Just have this big torch.
It's like using a blowtorch, essentially,
I can just see Arnie with
and not unlike a welding situation, it's like massive. That's it exactly. So they do beautiful work. Kristen does these beautiful and. Again, sorry, but you would love these because it would speak to your history in archiving and that sort of thing. Kristen has done a long history of embedding imagery like postcards and old letters and photographs in glass. And
are these artists all on Instagram?
They're all on Instagram. They're all in Melbourne. Laurie's now living down in Tassie with Christian, but Brenda Page is also a kiln worker who screen prints glass and fires it. And she too will use a lot of old photographs and old stories and old postcards and old letters. Kristen will often.
Where does she source these items from? Are they from?
You'd have to talk to them about where they find it, but definitely between Kristen and Brenda, you would find it from an archivist's point of view. You would find it quite fascinating. But definitely they're both on Instagram. They're both on Facebook. They both have studios. Brenda teaches a lot. She has her own retail teaching environment and space, but they both have their studios, I think, up in the Dandenong Ranges somewhere now.
Another excursion.
Yep, another one.
Both these girls, I've known, again, on and off, was more in contact with them when I was in the glass industry, sort of involved with them in that way, but I've always sort of maintained a watchful eye on what they're doing, and occasionally we'll try and get to see what they're doing in exhibitions and the like. But,
nice.
But
we'll have to see if they're exhibiting.
But definitely, they've got their open studios will come up eventually. I know Kristen is, I think, doing the Dandenong Ranges open studio, but their work is quite unique and would resonate because of their use of photography and writing and that sort of thing, which is encapsulated. And I don't know their technique. I have no idea. Would like to do a class one of these days to be able to get involved in that.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
But it is... it is worth looking into the kind of work that they do. And this is the thing, we have a very, very rich artistic culture in this country in glass art, but we have very
little acknowledgement.
We have little acknowledgement, but also there's not a lot of really well-known studios where you can see it. There's or not so much studios, but retail environments or gallery environments. There are some. I think one's called Red Moon. But there used to be a very, very well-known glass retailer or glass seller called Kira Studios or Kira Glass, which used to be in Fed Square. They used to have a big shop in Fed
I remember that, and then they've closed down.
Yeah, the original person who owned it. The original fellow who started it passed away, and he had a very, very cheap rent. Apparently, he was one of the first people there, and had a very, very, very low rent. But after he passed, if the family didn't want to continue the business, so I think he passed away or he retired or whatever. The owners, the rent, was going to go up if the family didn't take over the business. They were going to, and so nobody decided. There was no
continuity,
and so the business just closed. So after he was not there, it's a long time ago now.
Was he a glass artist himself, or was
he
just
his collector? I just know that they used to have a shop in. And this is going way back, so it's really not even in my memory really well. But it was way back in, when I was working in glass, so early 2000s, that there was a shop. They had a space in South Bank, and then they moved into Fed Square. And that you just saw some of the most beautiful, extraordinary glass. That was all Australian made, and just
a place for artists to sell their beautiful work.
Yeah.
I think it's just interesting because we do have a rich artistic... Like, I know that we're not obviously as in front of, Europe's art culture and all that sort of thing. Or
we don't have
America.
the population.
We don't have the population,
And
the support for it as well.
That's right.
Exactly. Yes. And, I think it's really interesting because when you, dive deep into it, there is a lot of amazing...
It's all there.
It is there.
It's all there.
But it's kind of just underground.
It's a little bit underground. It's a little bit struggling.
It's not celebrated like other countries will celebrate their... we were talking before about Japan. They celebrate their art forms and their history and culture.
Artisans are a
Australians
rich part
generally
of their history. And,
sadly don't.
You know, and in Australia...
We celebrate sport.
Yeah.
Like my partner says, men, running around kicking balls.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, there's that.
Interesting.
I hope David gets a kick out of that.
But yeah, I think...
Pardon the pun.
Yeah, so, and I think,
Yeah.
they're just a couple of people that, I've known over the years who I've always admired what they did. But there are many more,
yes.
and there's probably some that I haven't mentioned that will probably really be annoyed with
Apologies.
me.
To
any of those wonderful people that I've met over 20 years of glass.
I'm sure there's a long list.
There's some extraordinary people, and at different levels, and little furious people working in little backyard studios like me, and. So there are quite a number of them that I've met over the years, and they're all extraordinary. Another one is a woman by the name of Helen Walsh, who I think she's just on 90.
Wow.
And she has worked in glass her entire life.
That's incredible.
That's really cool.
In the
She must
70s,
know a
80s,
lot.
she worked for a lead light studio, one of the earliest lead light studios in Melbourne, and she has spent her entire life. What that woman has done and known in glass, probably none of us will ever know. And
she's probably done so much.
Yeah,
she
exactly.
is and extremely generous and giving with her understanding of using gold lusters on glass.
Wow.
And,
I've heard you talk about it before.
She has no
She shares
issues.
her techniques, doesn't
Very
she?
much shares her techniques. Share everything. She'll tell you anything you want to know.
She probably doesn't want it to
is
go
a
with
national
her.
treasure.
Like, she probably doesn't
No,
want
it's
that knowledge and experience to. When she is gone, she probably wants that to
it to
pass
continue.
on.
There are
what
a
I
lot
really
of
respect
very well known glass artists in this country.
Yeah.
Some that have passed, some that are still around.
There are elders that we need to listen to.
But
Yeah.
what they have in their heads is just extraordinary. And and this is the thing, is that I've been blessed with that as well, like so much else that I've had within my art journey, being involved with this whole other media has been an eye-opener. Things that I thought was, you just did this and do that and that's how it works, and then you go, no, it's not as simple as that. There's this whole other understanding of a medium. It's like we were talking, understanding how the oil paint works, and that's something
it's
that
a learning
you learn
process,
and
you
you go
only
through
learn
that
from
process.
Only from doing
Glass
and making.
is much the
Yeah.
same. I used to explain to people about how to make glass beads, and I go, well, you just get this stick, this
then you
metal
have to go,
rod, and you just get this bit of glass, and you just heat it up on the flame, and you just wind it
Until
on.
you start doing it, you go,
and then when you start doing it, you go, no.
No, it's like, no, you don't know
There's
what
a
it's
little bit
about.
more
Also,
to it.
I think there's also with glass, there's this element of fear, because even when
Sure.
you're cutting it or you're
Oh,
working the
yeah.
frame,
Yeah.
because you have to have confidence to do that
Absolutely.
as well.
Oh, sure,
Safely.
sure.
Yeah.
Because I'm
But
sure there would be that element of
I would have to say, and touch wood,
you've never
Yeah.
had any-
I worked in art shops for years, so obviously loading paper onto shelves and pulling paper off shelves and paper cuts like you wouldn't believe.
Oh,
And man, they hurt.
Yeah, they
But
do.
Oh,
you know
no.
what? Touch wood. I have cut myself more on paper than I ever have on glass.
Isn't that interesting?
Do you use gloves or protective?
Oh, all the time.
Of course, you can definitely.
Of course, I am.
Yeah.
Yes, listeners.
All
Yes, you can-
safety
Jen is
all
first.
the time.
Safety, yes.
I think maybe it's probably because you just know how it
It's
works, and maybe that's
understanding
why.
the handling
Like,
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's why.
Respect-
It's like
it.
with your chemicals. You
Yeah,
know, when
you wouldn't
you're
just
doing,
splash it around. You
know, you're not going to bath in it. You know, it's
Oh,
like,
why not?
Oh
I
gosh.
think that's how it
there's
works.
always that possibility. But it's just it is about understanding your medium, and
Oh wow, this has been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
thank you, Jen. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness, I could literally talk to you all day. Honestly, I could. And we
Yeah,
have.
absolutely.
But I love
know.
just listening to you talk, because you have this wealth of knowledge, and the fact that you're willing to share that with Jayden and I. Thank you, and our
Yeah,
listeners.
please.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
and
That was
yeah,
really
and of
awesome.
course, if people, and here's the little bit of the blurb. Anybody wants to do a class,
Yes.
Yeah.
more than welcome.
Oh yes.
Absolutely.
We'll have to contact Jen if you would like to. If you're interested, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll leave links to all your stuff below.
Cool.
I'll leave also another link to the episode you did for the creators process, so they can learn a bit more
Yeah,
about
excellent.
your art study and all that sort of thing. But yeah, no. thank you once again
Thank
for tuning in and coming onto our podcast. It was absolutely amazing.
It's always a pleasure to have you here.
Absolutely. And so for our listeners, definitely thank you for tuning into another episode of Speaking the Bare Truth. I hope you enjoyed it. I know that we all did have a really great time talking about this sort of stuff. If you want to say your thoughts on glass to art, comment down below. Subscribe to our channel. We'd love to have you. And let's keep supporting the art community. Let's keep having this conversation.
Yes.
As we've said, if we stop having it, then it's, then it
ceases
stops.
to exist. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, let's keep having the conversation. And we'll see you in the next episode we do. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.